So a bad back is not always a weak back. Matter of fact, sometimes people have lower back pain because they overuse their back too much and they don't use their hips. You'll see an inappropriate ratio between hip strength and back strength because the back muscles are being used more than they're supposed to be. So the body's not distributing the workload the way it's supposed to. And instead what it's doing, it's relying on the back muscles. So these muscles actually become a little bit too strong, overused, and therefore the person typically thinks they've got a weak back because their back has problems, and that's not always the case. A weak back can be a precursor to bad backs, though, however. One of the things that you'll see, going back to also to topic number 1, is that the body's response often to instability and apprehension is to overreact in tightness, or to lock it down. So you'll see somebody that has a tight lower back, and it could be because they were overusing the back, but it also could be because the back is sensing that it's unstable and that potentially it's at risk for injury. So the muscles respond by taking that information from all the proprioceptors in the joints that are around it, and the muscles instead, and they sense that there's potential shear and risk, so they go down on lockdown. So the muscles now become tight as a result, but it's not because the back is actually weak. And a weak back, however, as you can imagine, can be a precursor to lower back pain. Because at that point now the person has a threshold at which they can tolerate certain demands on their body. And if they exceed that threshold, the body, next thing it does is resorts to secondary strategies for movement, which will often stress the lower back. Does that make sense? These are, because I want you, as we're going through this, I want you to think about your clients with your lower back pain, and I want you to think about what their perception is of what they need to do for their back. And when you think about that, and you think about some of the things that you're going to have to sort of explain away to them, these are some of the very common things that you're going to see. Muscle endurance is initially much more important than strengthening. If you think about the demands on the spine and demands on our body in the environment of gravity and gravitational forces, do you think it's so important to get on a Roman chair with a weight and kind of do back extensions there compared to what you need to do, for example, standing? One of the more common things that we'll hear from our clients as far as their primary complaints is something like shopping. Do you ever hear somebody goes window shopping or they're standing at a cocktail party? That's when their backs really get them. So there's not a need for them to be able to move massive amounts of weight with their lower back. Instead, it's the ability to sustain prolonged, low-level contractions instead of big, forceful contractions with a lot of weight for short periods of time. Now, that's different than if they're out having to lift heavy things in the yard and move them into the garage or whatever it is. There's a need for that at the same time. But most of the time, what you're going to find is the need for muscle endurance. So be able to sustain low-level contractions over longer periods of time. That's what the body needs to do first. Getting them to overload their system with heavy weights initially because or perhaps they've been doing it themselves, thinking their back needs to get stronger, especially if they've got existing history of back pain, there's a good chance that they're going to compensate out of what they need to do anyway. So they're not going to develop improved movement strategies. More likely what they're going to do is they're just going to add load to their existing dysfunction.